The first week of June, I helped move 7 boxes of books from the back of a minivan and into room C over here. The wife of one of the pastors in our Renton Gospel Network had brought over her husband's entire pastoral library. He's the pastor who has been battling brain cancer for more than 2 years now. He was given a year. God has so far doubled the amount of time that he's been able to remain with his church and his young family. He and his wife have been grateful that he's had this extra time, that God has given him this time. However, current treatments seem to be having little effect. So they have decided that it is time for him to donate his library. I was happy to take on the task of finding good homes for these commentaries and theological books, and Keith has been assisting with that. In fact, we were moving some books today as we're getting ready to move our chairs into that classroom for this week. But as I was looking at these boxes, it struck me that this dear brother in Christ invested in these books with the belief that he was going to have many years of ministry to be able to make an impact for the gospel of Christ. Yet here was his pastoral library sitting in our classroom in boxes. I have prayed many times for this brother, as well as for his wife and their young kids, and I have to tell you, they all reflect a tremendous graciousness and hope. A sweet family they are. Who could have anticipated when he first joined our pastors group back in 2018 that his time here would be so abruptly cut short? Of course, I speak from our perspective. I have no doubt in my mind that he will have been on this earth just as long as our gracious God saw fit. I also have no doubt that his testimony of trust in the Lord in the face of the unthinkable has been used mightily by God for eternal purposes. He and his wife have been the exemplification of the hope that is conveyed in 2 Corinthians 4, verses 17 and 18. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. The weight of glory, as C.S. Lewis put it, far outweighs the weight of the sorrows that we bear in this life. It is this reality that gives us strength, not only in the face of the unthinkable, but in the midst of the mundane, daily trials that we all face. The question is, how do we experience more persistently and profoundly the kind of hope that is conveyed in these verses? I'm not talking primarily about those times when tragedy strikes. Honestly, in some ways, great tragedy empowers those who love the Lord to embrace a more real and distinct hope. It's often in the midst of the mundane struggles that we have the hardest time. We are most tempted to lose sight of where it is our hope really lies. We get distracted. We are surrounded by distractions. How do we keep ourselves from being sucked down by the undertow of cynicism, discontentment, and self-absorption that is so prevalent in our society today? What enables a person to cling to hope, peace, joy, when so much of what comes our way in this world would leave us hopeless, anxious, and grieved? Certainly one of the best places to look for the answer to such a question is in those who have gone through the unthinkable, yet have maintained hope. It is a reality that we have already seen a few different times during our current sermon series in Daniel. Obviously, God's people living in exile in a foreign land would be trial enough to challenge one's hope, peace, and joy. But back in Daniel 3, we witnessed 3 Hebrew children who were standing in a fiery furnace, yet their hope in God was unwavering. Today we see another profound example of unwavering hope in the title character of this book, and it all takes place in the lion's den. I invite you to take out your sermon outlines and to turn to Daniel chapter 6. There are extra Bibles and outlines on the tables in the back. When we got to Daniel 3 and the fiery furnace, I mentioned that the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is a Sunday school teacher's dream, right? It's a lesson that basically teaches itself. The story of Daniel in the lion's den may just trump the fiery furnace in terms of Sunday school lessons. Only thing, I would caution you against the tendency to see this as merely a children's story. Familiarity breeds contempt. Because we know this story so well, it's easy to miss just how great a risk Daniel took in disobeying the order of the king, and just how fearful a situation that he was placed in. So as I read this story to you this morning, I challenge you to listen to it as if you're listening to it for the first time. Let Daniel's example of hope in the face of the unthinkable sink in. Follow along as I read Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." Now, a few things as we begin here. As a reminder, Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded by Belshazzar. Belshazzar, who couldn't read the handwriting on the wall, had his reign cut short, as we read in Daniel chapter 5, verses 30 and 31. Says that very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Now, if you've listened to the Bible, the audio versions of the Bible, it's possible I've heard someone pronounce this man's name Darius, different things. But here's the thing. VeggieTales says Darius, and so Darius it is. So Darius the Mede inaugurates the beginning of Babylon's rule under the Medo-Persian Empire. We call it Medo-Persian because it is the Persian king Cyrus who puts Darius the Mede in charge as Cyrus continues his military campaigns. However, though kings and even empires have changed, one guy has remained steadfast. Now here's the thing. We live in a culture where our leaders, our politicians, struggle mightily with corruption. Where is there not corruption in our governmental systems? But here's a guy who is not corrupt. And by this time, if you think about it, we started this narrative in chapter 1 when Daniel was a teenager. Now, we don't know precisely, but he's probably near, if not 80 years old right now. And isn't that kind of funny? I got to tell you, when I heard stories of Daniel in the lion's den, I never imagined an 80-year-old. But this is about his age at this time. And yet he's gone through all these years. He's survived different rulers. And he's thrived because he was a man of integrity. Do you see what they say? We're not going to find any corruption in this guy unless we trip him up somehow related to his faith, because we know his faith is what he's all about. And so it is in this context that we see these envious co-rulers, leaders in Babylon, looking for a way that they can take Daniel down. Yet the blessings which lead to his continued favor with kings are the same blessings which lead to disfavor with his fellow governors, which leads to the conspiracy. Verse 4, they tried to find charges against Daniel. Here's the beginning of the conspiracy, but they couldn't find any, because last sentence of verse 4 says they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Again, wouldn't that be great if we could apply those same words to most of our government leaders? But we read in Proverbs 22:1, a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Believers, what kind of name do we have in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods? Do we represent integrity and uprightness? Are we above reproach? This is the example that we see in Daniel. Listen to what one commentator says they were looking for some motive or cause, even though falsely alleged, that they could bring against Daniel regarding how he had handled the administrative matters of the kingdom. As hard as they looked, however, they could not find any pretext or any evidence of corruption in Daniel. The reason was simple. Daniel was trustworthy. He was a reliable man, one who could be counted on to do what was right and not stoop to foul play of any kind. Here was a man of integrity who, because he was first and foremost committed to pleasing God, could be trusted by others to do what was right. Again, though his trustworthiness was a boon to Darius, it made his fellow leaders jealous, which led to this conspiracy. I got a call from a fellow pastor recently who was seeking counsel after one of his leaders publicly acknowledged his adherence to a certain conspiracy theory. I won't tell you what it is, since that would be divulging a confidence here. But I can tell you, I've never heard anyone who actually believed the conspiracy theory this man was espousing. One of the issues with conspiracy theories is that they too easily overshadow the kingdom of God. Maybe Roswell, New Mexico is the site of an elaborate government cover-up of a UFO encounter. Maybe JFK's death was the result of a plot within the U.S. government. Maybe Elvis really is still alive. I don't even know how old he would be right now. Here's the thing. Even if one of those or all of those conspiracies are true, does it matter? Does it matter at all compared to the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Listen, maybe you can find a conspiracy theory that's true, but even if it is, if we log dozens of hours or hundreds of hours into never-ending web searches, is that more beneficial than contemplating, pursuing, and praying about the only kingdom that is going to survive all of this? Because there's only one, folks. And it's not the kingdom of the United States of America, if you haven't figured that out yet. Don't take my word for it. Follow Daniel's example. You'll notice as we make our way through this passage, Daniel doesn't focus on the conspiracy. He doesn't even protest the injustice. Can you imagine Daniel with his little sign, "Let me pray"? He doesn't protest. What does he do? He just remains faithful to God. That's all. He keeps his focus on the trustworthiness of Yahweh. Let's continue to read about this conspiracy. Verses 6 through 9 say, "So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, 'O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed.' So King Darius put the decree in writing." Speaking of conspiracy, do you see in verse 6 where it says that they went as a group? In the New International Version, the English ESV has came by agreement. All the commentaries I read this week or a few weeks ago agree that the words here connote conspiracy. In fact, the New Revised Standard Version actually uses the word conspire in verse 6. Here it is, folks, the real conspiracy theory. It's right here in Daniel chapter 6. Specifically, they are conspiring to see Daniel not only removed from power, but killed. And in an awfully gruesome manner. Anyone who is caught praying to anyone or anything other than Darius will be thrown into the den of lions. Talk about cruel and unusual punishment. Sadly, historical documents indicate that this kind of gruesome punishment was not so unusual in ancient Babylon. Part of me wants to make a comment here about how our culture has gone the opposite direction of cruel and unusual punishment. That may be part of the reason why there's so much unrestrained violence in our culture today, but I'm not going to say anything about that. Let's see if this conspiracy has its desired impact. Verse 10, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." Now, there is a lot to unpack in just that one verse, but at its core, what we see here is civil disobedience. Daniel shows courage and conviction in his response to this law. He's not praying in this manner because of the law. The sense we get here is that this was Daniel's regular habit. This was his spiritual discipline. He prayed 3 times a day. Even though his act is civil disobedience, that is not why he does it. He prays because he needs to pray. I love this commentary that says one should keep in mind that Daniel is an elderly man at this time, probably in his 80s. This is not the first time that he has had to make hard choices in light of his faith. Experiences such as that recorded in Daniel 1 served to build the character of Daniel over the years, even as an oak tree gains strength with each passing year. Godly men want to finish the race well. This has been a theme that I've heard with some of my fellow pastors of late, a theme that I've been contemplating more and more. Want to finish the race well. And thus it is no surprise to find Daniel opting to faithfully continue as a man of prayer. Prayer, after all, was a core part of his being, not something to flippantly be set aside. This was the avenue for the real strength in his life. Young remarks, the higher the task to which God calls a man, the more does he feel the need for prayer. Men and women who want to know God, be used by God, live for God, cannot do so without daily set-apart time in his presence. You can't. Because he is our source. He is our strength. He is our teacher, our instructor. We need him, and therefore we need prayer. Prayer's a funny thing, because it feels at times when you're praying like maybe you're wasting your time, which I love. I got a book on my shelf titled Wasting Time with God. I like that. Yes, waste time with God. Because I got to tell you, there isn't a better way for you to spend your time. We need to be a people who are disciplined in prayer. We need to grow in that discipline because our strength is in him. If the strength was in me, then I wouldn't need to pray, right? As for opening his window and praying toward Jerusalem, Daniel is simply doing that which is mentioned in the dedication of Solomon's temple. If you go back and read that story, hundreds of years earlier, it actually looks ahead to the possibility of exile. You see, all along we're getting prepared for God's people going into exile because they turned away from their God, because they didn't pray, but sought their own paths. And so already at the dedication of Solomon's temple, it's looking ahead saying, well, let me see here. I did quote it here. Let's read it. If they turn back to you. So this is the dedication of Solomon's temple, and Solomon's looking ahead. If they turn back to you with all their heart after going into exile, and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and pray to you toward the land you gave their fathers, toward the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name. Then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause. This prayer of Solomon, like the prayers of Daniel, reflect trust in the faithfulness of Yahweh God. We continue in verses 11 to 15. Then these men, these conspirators, went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. And at this point, they're just giddy with excitement. He said it. Okay. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. Now, I don't know if there's a better example of entrapment than what we find here. These men caught Daniel red-handed, so they went to the king. O king, didn't you say that no one could pray to anyone but you, and if they did, they'd be fed to the lions? Sure enough, said the king, and no such decree can be repealed. Perfect, said the sniveling, whining, hand-wringing cowards. I may be adding a few things in there, but I can just imagine them just like this. That Jew you're so fond of won't stop praying in complete disregard of you and your decree. According to verse 14, what was the king's response? Do you see it there, verse 14? He was greatly distressed. He wasn't distressed because of Daniel's praying. I think he could care less about that. He was distressed because he realized that in his own foolish pride, he had fallen into a trap that would result in the death of a good man. He tried to figure out some loophole, but there was none. And upon the subtle reminder of this group of cowards, Daniel was condemned, verses 16 to 18. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. So Daniel's the one who's thrown into the lion's den, but it's the king who can't sleep. Also, the king's words, "May your God rescue you," sounds a whole lot like a prayer. Lucky he didn't get thrown into the lion's den. The king's concern for Daniel is touching. And the fact that he even has a hope that Daniel might be saved reflects the impact that Daniel and his three friends were having on the king. Maybe he'd heard the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But part of this is due to the fact that Daniel's faithfulness in serving God was authentic and obvious to onlookers. Believers, if we were tried for our faith based on the evidence, how we lived our lives, would we be convicted? Would our peers go, "Oh yeah, definitely a person of faith"? Or would they go, "Oh, you're a Christian? I didn't even know that. That's amazing." I remember when I started a prayer group when I was in high school with fellow high schoolers. We put the word out in my public high school, and we ended up at the second year, we had like 25 kids coming at 6:45 to pray at our school, which I thought was pretty amazing for public school. Amazing for me, getting out of bed that early. But I think a lot of them had the same response. As they looked around the room, they were like, "Oh, I didn't know there were other Christians at this school," you know? Believers, I'm not saying that you need to wear a Christian shirt every day when you go to work. Maybe that's the last thing you need to do. But would we be convicted? Would people know? Would they say, "Hey, I see in you faithfulness. I see in you love for God. I see in you love for people that's different than what I usually see"? The topic came up in our Gospel Conversations workshop. Sometimes, out of a desire to not offend unnecessarily those without Christ, we may be too concerned to avoid expressing our faith. But oftentimes it is the expression of our faith, not for show, but as a matter of course, which has the greatest kingdom impact. And you know what I'm talking about. I mean, your coworkers may know about your passion for fill in the blank. Do any of them know about any of your passions? It's kind of funny with some people. You mention a topic and wow, they're just lit up and they're excited. And so it makes sense that it should ooze out of us at times. Hey, I love Jesus. I have a passion for him. Again, not for a show. It's just a matter of course. It's just who we are. The conclusion we reached in our workshop, therefore, is that we don't need to flaunt our faith or be overly spiritual, but we also should not try to conceal our faith or be overly sensitive. We just need to live openly and genuinely our faith in God, even if doing so risks offense or even more dire consequences, as with Daniel. So, what happens to our hero? Verses 19 through 23. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. What we see here with Daniel in the lion's den is similar to what we witnessed with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and that is salvation through trust. At first light, the king is there, hoping against hope that Daniel might have survived the night. Imagine his joy to hear Daniel's loud, clear response. Notice in all of this, it is not really about Daniel. It's about the trustworthiness of Yahweh God. Verse 19, has your God been able to rescue you? Verse 21, my God sent his angels and shut the mouths of those lions. Verse 23, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord. It's a message that reverberates throughout the Old Testament story of God, which continues into the New Testament story of God. Salvation by grace through faith. Faith in him. Trust in God. Psalm 34:7, the angel of Yahweh encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. This is what happened to Daniel, as this famous painting from the 1600s portrays. This depiction by Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens hangs in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure exactly what Rubens was going for with Daniel's expression. Certainly, the depiction of Daniel in a prayerful pose makes sense. As well, he does a good job of making the lions look mean and hungry. I mean, if you look closely there, those are not friendly beasts. So I appreciate that. It's what we read there in verse 24. It says, at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Notice, God doesn't command this execution, right? This is at the direction of a king who was none too pleased to find that he had been duped, especially since it nearly cost the life of the greatest man in his kingdom. The fact that their bodies didn't even reach the den floor, however, serves to emphasize the greatness of God's salvation for Daniel. It was not that the lions weren't interested in man flesh, but that God had rescued Daniel, which our fourth point puts, God our rescuer. Verses 25 through 28. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Obviously, there are strong connections between this conclusion and the conclusion of Nebuchadnezzar in both chapters 3 and 4. Again, we must remember that the Jews are in exile in a pagan empire, and yet not only has God not abandoned his people, but he continues to show himself faithful by rescuing them. Verse 27, he rescues, he saves, and this from the lips of a pagan ruler. So verse 28, Daniel prospered. From this, we can only assume that he was promoted to second in command across Babylon, as was intimated at the beginning of the chapter. Likely, this also equated to material prosperity. Daniel was blessed by God. Why? Because he trusted in God and he was faithful to God. Listen to this commentary. Two facts concerning Daniel's religious life are evident from this text. First, Daniel's religious convictions were not hidden. The old prophet was not a secret disciple, but a man who was not ashamed to let others know that his allegiance was to the God of Israel. Second, Daniel's commitment was such that he would not compromise even in the face of punishment or death. I believe that both of these aspects of Daniel's faith serve as great examples for you and I. How we live out our Christian faith, as our first application point puts it, unashamed. Any of you remember Barbara Mandrell's song, I Was Country When Country Wasn't Cool? What a tremendous ballad. I bet it's on your summer playlist. Who of you has that on your summer playlist? Actually, I'm going to update my country song reference here because I just heard that Lainey Wilson, by the way, she has a great name. I like that name, Lainey, has a current country hit titled Country's Cool Again. I can't say I've heard it, but I get the idea. Because country isn't always considered cool in pop culture, right? Well, guess what? For many in our culture, Christianity isn't cool. Have you noticed that? It's a thing. Strangely enough, Jesus seems to have a moderating cool factor, right? I mean, people like to talk about Jesus, but the church he founded, not so much. Nasty headlines don't help. When big-name Christian leaders are forced to resign over sin, or when people co-opt and misuse the name of Christ for political purposes, or when Christians seem to be unable to get along with each other. Honestly, I can't help but agree with them. Christianity's not cool, if that's what Christianity is. Well, guess what? Our goal is not to be cool. I mean, that's a given. And we have this tendency to fall back on that bumper sticker theology, right? Christians aren't perfect, just forgiven. You've seen that one, right? I appreciate the point to some extent, but can you just show me where Paul says, I'm not perfect, just forgiven? He doesn't say that, at least if you read him in context. My Bible says that in Christ we are forgiven sin's penalty and freed from sin's power. For sure, we're not perfect, but we're more than just only forgiven. Truth is, Christians do a lot of amazing things in our world. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any group across the globe that does more for housing the unhoused, caring for the sick and marginalized, and feeding the hungry than Christ's followers. So if that's the case, why do Christians score so low on pop culture's cool index? Well, it's simple. It's not cool to believe that God's word is true and that God's word trumps human wisdom, self-expression, the pursuit of pleasure. Again, we discussed it in the Gospel Conversations workshop, that tolerance has been redefined so that just tolerating others with different views is not enough. You must accept and affirm any and every other viewpoint, whatever's deemed politically correct or or you risk getting canceled. Even the comic strips get it. I don't remember the name of the comic, but I was reading one of the Sunday comics from a few weeks ago, and the comic strip writer is erasing the characters because they say things you're not supposed to say. You get canceled in this culture if you say what you're not supposed to say. Now, by the way, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not excusing unloving or hateful speech. I'm not doing that. Okay? But I am saying that a politically correct culture that refuses to call a spade is problematic. We can't even call sin sin. I mean, look around you. Daniel was shameless. He was shameless in putting obedience to God over man's wisdom, even over man's laws. Not only that, he was uncompromising. In Acts 5:29, when the disciples were told by the authorities not to proclaim Christ, we read, Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men." Here, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, followers of Jesus are increasingly finding themselves at odds with the rules of man regarding the law, workplace norms, and societal norms. It's noteworthy that Daniel in chapter 6, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3, did not resort to name-calling or guerrilla warfare. Do you notice that? But he also refused to compromise. This is likely to be a continuing challenge for followers of Jesus in our culture, and increasingly so. Daniel's a great example for us. We must not compromise. Finally, Daniel provides an amazing model for us in that he was unshakable. Truth is, Daniel faced a rather extreme situation that you and I are not likely to encounter, right? We read the stories, we hear about people who encounter sharks in a deadly or destructive way, right? Makes you think twice about going into the water. When we were down for Deb's mom's 80th birthday, we were very near one of the beaches where someone was recently bitten. So you keep your eyes out for fins in the water. Or you see the stories about cougar attacks. That, to me, yikes. Or bear attacks. Does not sound like fun. But chances are, you and I are not going to be thrown into a lion's den. It's not that the notion of believers dying for their faith is so unusual. As missionaries and Christians in countries hostile to the Christian faith know, the possibility of personal injury and death is very real for many believers around the world who live in cultures that will not tolerate Christian faith. Certainly the death of the young missionary couple, again, that I've talked about in Haiti just last month, is evidence of this fact. But according to the NGO Open Doors, every day 13 Christians worldwide are killed because of their faith. 12 churches are attacked, and 12 Christians are unjustly arrested or imprisoned, while another 5 are abducted every single day. Multiply that by 365, and close to 5,000 Christians are killed for their faith every year. Now, you're not going to hear the media talking about these things very much, but it's happening. You may wonder, if God rescued Daniel, why doesn't he rescue all of these? Right? We know he could. He could simply keep it from happening. For that matter, why didn't he rescue the 12 disciples? At least 11 of the 12, according to history, died martyrs' deaths. He could have stopped that. But I think Paul provides the most succinct answer when he says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. You see, we have a hope that this world cannot take from us. And that is why Daniel is unshakable. He knows where he's going. And this is why you and I need not be shaken by whatever comes our way. We have an unshakable hope. Which brings us back to the words with which we began today's sermon. Would you read these with me? In fact, would you stand and let's read these words aloud. Let this be our proclamation as we conclude today's sermon. Read with me. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Let's pray. And God, we thank you so much for this rich hope that we have, the knowledge that no matter what we face in this world, nothing can take from us our hope in you. Nothing will shake your eternal kingdom. God, as we leave this place and as we return tonight and spend this week loving on these kids, help us to remember who we are and what a privilege it is to convey your love, your gospel, your kingdom truth to these children. We thank you for all this in the precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. God bless you as you go out today.